here on the west shore of Shawnigan Lake, Vancouver Island, British Columbia, Canada. Shawnigan Lake, the lake of ancestors, where for centuries and to this day, the first peoples come both to honor and to commune with those who have gone before. We honor and welcome their ancient presence and ask their blessing on the path of learning that lies before us. Again, welcome to Fireside on Sarita. Welcome to this, the fifth in this series of firesides on the Book of Existence. This is going to be the second to the last of the series, and the last one will be a summary. The topic or chapter for this fireside is the necessity of opposites. Sounds like a strange topic, doesn't it? But you'll understand in a moment. It is an absolute fact of existence. Whether we are talking about the spiritual realms or the world of existence, opposites are absolutely necessary. And this, like so many things, begins at the beginning. In fact, it begins before the beginning. And we can trace, science at least, can trace the beginnings of the universe back to 10 to the negative 43 of 1 second. And that leaves a very, very unimaginably tiny fraction of a second that is beyond our scientific horizons, at least, but not beyond the horizons of the manifestation of God, not beyond the knowledge of the Creator. And as Baha'is, we accept that the manifestations of God are not like us. They are like us in that they are a human temple, but they possess a capacity that is absolutely beyond us. They see what we will and shall never see. Isn't it extraordinary that in this day, the words of the manifestation of God were written down and authenticated and stamped and sealed and are now preserved and translated by the guardian of the Baha'i faith so perfectly that when we hear Baha'u'llah say the world of existence came into being through the heat formed from the interaction between the active force and that which is its recipient, then we know that we are peering into the very beginnings, the very first minute moments of the world of existence, not through the eyes of scientific discovery, but through the eyes of the Creator. The active force and that which is its recipient. And then he goes on to say, these two are the same, yet they are different. Now, I can't pretend to know precisely what Baha'u'llah is talking about here. But I think we are allowed to speculate a little based on what we know. This could change. We could learn something that takes my notion of it and tosses it aside and replaces it with something better. But my thought is this, that what Baha'u'llah is speaking of, and you can use your own judgment as to how accurate or how brilliant or how dumb this is. But my thought on it is this. At the very beginning of the expression of the world of existence, this we know. Matter and antimatter sprung into existence, and in massive, massive quantities. Remember, still, we're talking about a subatomic sized universe But nevertheless, matter and antimatter appeared and canceled each other out. And when matter and antimatter cancel each other out, it's with explosive energy, massively explosive energy. And yet, for every 1 billion particles of antimatter, there just happens to be 1,000,000,001 particles of matter. And as they canceled each other out, the residual 1 in 1 billion is what we have left and what comprises our entire universe. And this actually points at one of the first binaries here, and that is order and disorder. It is not perfect symmetry. Even at the very beginning of the universe, there was this little imbalance. So balance and imbalance. And this is necessary for creation. If there weren't that small imbalance, there would be no existence. There would be no world of existence. So that's kind of interesting. And Baha'u'llah said these two are the same, yet they are different. And antimatter and matter are the same, yet they are different. And for instance, we have electrons and we have positrons. And we know that a positron is the antimatter equivalent of an electron. And we use them all the time in PET scans. The P in PET scan stands for positron. Positronic emission tomography, I think is what it stands for. And it's a very important piece of equipment in many hospitals. Life-saving piece of equipment. So we know that matter and antimatter exist. We know they cancel each other out. And that this explosive energy, this heat, was sufficient to cause the first particles, the first subatomic particles to come into existence. Leptons, antileptons, protons, neutrons, and so on. And this was the stuff that coalesced eventually in those massive early forces of the universe into the first atoms. And the atoms themselves were expanding. And as the universe expanded, it cooled. So we have pressure, which causes heat, and the release of pressure, which causes cooling. There's another binary of the early universe. Even prior to that expression, there was a binary. And that was energy unexpressed and the laws that were to govern it unapplied. So think about that one. Before the universe expressed into existence, there was a moment, not a moment because time hadn't existed, but a state where energy potentially existed, could potentially be expressed, and there were the laws that would apply to it the moment it expressed. And so this is another binary. The active force and that which is its recipient, perhaps. So we have containment versus escape. There's another one. We have motion versus stillness, and this kind of comes into play right at this moment as the universe is expanding, because an expanding universe is providing space between the atoms, and as it creates space, there is cooling. There is order versus randomness. And cooling does not, in this early universe, happen homogeneously. There are variations in it. And we can see a 400,000-year-old universe first expressed light. Prior to that, the universe was so dense, the newly formed atoms were so densely packed together that light could not freely move and the universe was dark. Imagine the universe darkened. But through the process of expansion and space appearing between the atoms and the process of ionization, there came a moment when suddenly all of that light that was potentially there blasted out. And we still receive that light today. It's bathing down upon us right now. It's microwave background radiation. And we have a picture of it. And you look at that picture and you see there is light color and dark color. It goes from yellow down to deep, deep blue. And where it is deep, deep blue is an area of coolness. And the differences in color represent differences in temperature. Very, very minute differences in temperature, I'm going to say, but nevertheless differences in temperature. And where it is dark blue, it is cooler. Now, atoms, when they're energized by heat, vibrate and move and bounce about. So the warmer they are, the more they bang into each other and the more they want to create space between themselves. The less energy, the more compact they become. So it's the difference between like a snowball and when you really pack a snowball, it becomes really solid. So the difference between those areas are differences in density. So this is like a baby picture of the universe. And those dark blue areas, a map of the shape and pattern that would be taken on by the forming suns and galaxies of our universe. And as these, and we're talking massive, massive, massive amounts of atoms coalescing like this. As the atoms are pressed together by their own gravity, they create heat. And eventually this heat becomes so great that it causes fusion, nuclear fusion. And nuclear fusion releases massive amounts of energy. And it just happens that the massive release of that energy is contained by the electromagnetic and gravitational forces that are holding them together. And so you get this balance so that you have an explosive release of energy that is contained at the same time, and we call it a sun. Now, the first suns were massively huge, and they lived only about 1 million years before they collapsed in on themselves and exploded. And when they collapsed in on themselves and exploded, the great forces involved created heavier elements. So we went from hydrogen, helium, lithium, beryllium. By combining 2 hydrogen atoms, you get helium. By adding a hydrogen atom to helium, you get lithium. By adding another hydrogen atom to lithium, you get beryllium, and it works its way up to the very heaviest elements. And so here's another binary, life and death, birth and death, the birth of a star and the death of a star. And without the birth and death of stars, there would not be the material of which we are now made. Carbon was early on the list of things that were being created in that very early universe. So that universe, small though it may have been, must have looked like the 4th of July fireworks display. And those materials that were expelled from those explosions, those supernova explosions, began to coalesce into new, heavier suns. And this process rolled forward. Remember, whatever objects appear in the world of existence are the outer pictures of the world of heaven, according to Abdu'l-Baha. So all that we have talked about so far is but a picture of something else, the spiritual realm, the heavenly realm. And what we're talking about now is perception. And let's talk about physical perception first. we see only by virtue of the contrast between light and dark, between light and shadow. And when we take contrast to the extreme, we get something like this. But there are thousands and thousands and thousands of shades of gray in between. So this is a primary binary, light and dark. How about near and far? This is another way that we perceive, another binary by which we perceive. And as babies, we learn right off the bat what's near and what's far, what we can reach with our hands and what we can't. We learn other concepts, other pairs of binary bracketing, like large and small, hot and cold. And all of our physical perceptions, all of our ability to navigate our world are based on these types of brackets, these types of binary brackets. There's male and female, there's life and death. There's rough and smooth, dry and wet. And all of these things help us to perceive. Now let's take it to the next level. And the next level is our mental capacity, our ability to know. And we know, according to Baha'u'llah, that this capacity to know is uniquely bestowed upon man. And we know only by virtue of being able to bracket ideas, of being able to see things apart from their background. And we use similar, remember these physical perceptions that I was talking about, light and dark, near and far, and so on, are outer pictures of the heavenly realm, that is the world of thought. I hope I'm not boring you to death with this, but it is necessary to understand how this works. We only understand relative knowledge. We cannot understand absolute knowledge. If we had no contrast, we couldn't see. So we have to be able to contrast to see. That's the basic one. We have to compare things one to another. All of our understanding is based upon comparison, of juxtaposing ideas one with another. And by this method, we draw them out of their background and see things, ideas, for themselves. We see ideas apart from their background. And ideas are not always apparent to us. The entire history of science is an example of this, of pulling ideas that were always there and seeing them apart from their background. And if you think about how you physically do this, if you're walking through the forest and you see an animal, we don't see that animal at first, but maybe it moves a little bit, and then you suddenly see it apart from its background. Large and small helps us know what is near and far. So we know things by comparison, we know things by degree. So let's apply it to the spiritual verities. What about kindness versus cruelty? Love versus hate? Generosity? Think about what the opposite of generosity is. Forgiveness, patience, serenity, sanctity. These are all spiritual verities, and they all have their shadow trait. Love, kindness, forgiveness, generosity, sanctity. And we couldn't see one without the other. And this, ultimately, is the purpose and necessity of opposites in the spiritual realm. And I'm going to wrap this up with a quote from Abdu'l-Baha. We will defer to Abdu'l-Baha on this one. Among the proofs of the existence of divine power is this: that things are often known by their opposites. Were it not for darkness, light could not be sensed. Were it not for death, life could not be known. If ignorance did not exist, knowledge would not be a reality. It is necessary that each should exist in order that the other should have reality. Night and day must be in order that each may be distinguished. Night itself is an indication and evidence of day which follows, and day itself indicates the coming of night. Unless night were a reality, there could not be day. Were it not for death, there could be no life. Things are known by their opposites. Therefore, our weakness is an evidence that there is might. Our ignorance proves the reality of knowledge. Our need is an indication of supply and wealth. Were it not for wealth, this need would not exist. Were it not for knowledge, ignorance would be unknown. Were it not for power, there would be no impotence. In other words, demand and supply is the law. And undoubtedly, all virtues have a center and source. That source is God, from whom all these bounties emanate. And we shall leave it at that, my friends. And I look forward to having a good discussion about the necessity of opposites. And hopefully we can discuss that idea about why would God create evil. And we understand perhaps through this that evil is a necessity to understanding goodness. And I thank you for your kind attention. I used to wish that I was older. Now I wish that I was young. Looking back over my shoulder, my precious moments in the sun. Looking back, battles lost, battles won. Looking back, the crooked roads